It will never be a good time to buy a home. I wouldn't doubt if you've said that statement before. I know I definitely have, especially after the past few years with housing prices and inflation rising so rapidly. In this video, I'll talk about if there will ever be a good time to buy a home, if you can time the housing market, and what you can do to prepare yourself to buy a home. I'll also give you free access to a resource to determine your housing affordability. It's no secret that buying a home right now is very difficult. With home prices increasing about 40% within the last few years, interest rates are at their highest in the past 20 years, and a lack of inventory has made the perfect storm where it's really difficult to buy a home. I know for me personally, I've been looking to potentially buy a home for the past few years, and it just hasn't seemed like it's a good time for me to buy, for multiple reasons. Some have to do with the current housing market, and some have to do with where I happen to be in my life. We have a kid who's going to graduate high school soon, and we may downsize or move. It's really hard to say what the next few years look like and if it really makes sense to buy, especially when buying right now feels like a long-term commitment. But enough about me. One thing that you may have considered when you're thinking about if you're going to buy a home is the future of real estate. And one of the things I know a lot of people are thinking is going to happen is a housing market crash. And if there's a crash, the thought is that home prices will go down significantly and it will be a better time to buy a home. Now, I believe this is a possibility. I'm not 100% sure that we're going to have a national housing market crash like we did in 2008. I do see some markets where the prices are depreciating and they might continue to depreciate. So those are markets that I would really be concerned about buying in right now, especially if you aren't prepared to make a long-term commitment to living in the home. But I also don't see it as a guarantee that yes, absolutely the housing market will crash and prices will drop significantly. Because if you think about it, in the 2008 crash, yes, housing prices went down. However, it took a number of years, I think about 4 years, for home prices to get to its lowest, and I think they dropped 20 or 30%, which obviously sounds like a lot because it is, but right now we're in a unique position since housing prices increased about 40% within the last few years. If it goes down 20 or 30%, it's still going to be very expensive to buy a home compared to a few years ago. Then there's the scenario that there isn't a housing market crash and prices don't decrease significantly. However, it's very possible that we're going to have a challenging market for many years. First-time home buyers have found it really difficult to buy a home, especially within the past few years because of all the competition to buy a home. There have been buyers who are in a better spot to buy a home, maybe with cash, or they have a large down payment. Things like that are difficult for first-time home buyers to compete with when there are multiple offers on a home. Now let's talk about the statement, it will never be a good time to buy a home. Honestly, I think for some people, unfortunately, that's a very true statement. Before the housing market kind of got all wonky a few years ago, it was difficult for people to buy a home. Then now you stack on all the other challenges that I've mentioned earlier in this video, and it feels like an impossible task. And it's really frustrating to think that you may not reach your goal of buying a home. I've worked with clients and I've met people who thought they would never be able to buy a home, and they were able to buy a home. But of course, that doesn't work out for everyone. Now, I don't say any of these things to discourage you, but I think that that's reality. The statement is true for some people that it will never be a good time to buy a home, and they may never be able to buy at all. But there are some things that you can do that are in your control that may help you buy a home, like being financially prepared and buying at the right time. How do you time the housing market? In my opinion, I don't think there's a true way to time the housing market. I think when you hear about people who got this great deal on a home and they bought at the perfect time, a lot of that has to do with luck and maybe circumstance. There are ways to have an educated guess on when it could be a good time to buy, but it's not a guarantee that you'll buy at the perfect time. When I bought my first home in 2003, it ended up working out pretty well because we got a good price on the home, and then prices started to increase a lot. I had friends who bought in 2006 and 2007 at the top of the market, and they ended up underwater on their mortgage, which means you owe more to the bank than what your home is worth. Now, I wasn't in real estate back then and had no idea about the market and what would happen, so I just happened to get really lucky that I was able to avoid some of the issues that my friends had. So if you can't time the market, what can you do? When is the best time to buy a home? Ultimately, the best time to buy a home is when you're ready to buy a home. A key factor that comes down to this is your financial preparedness. We're talking about a good credit score, having a budget, and saving for a down payment. What's a good credit score? Ultimately, I would suggest that you talk with a loan officer and they can help you determine what would be a good credit score for your situation that aligns with your goals and needs of buying a home. Usually, having a credit score of 620 or more means you should be able to qualify for a loan. You may just not get the best interest rate. Having a credit score of 740 or more usually means you can get the best interest rate. But again, you really want to speak with a lender because everyone's situation is different. If you don't have a budget currently or it's not an updated budget, I think it makes a lot of sense to figure out what your spending habits are, how much money you have available for a mortgage payment each month, and then when you do your budget, you can figure out how you can save for a down payment. Saving for a down payment can be very difficult, especially nowadays. There are some alternative options like getting a loan where you don't have to have a big down payment, like an FHA loan where you can get a down payment as low as 3.5%. There are also other loan programs where you can even buy a home with 0% down. And again, this is when you reach out to a loan officer to figure out what your options are as far as that goes. There are also down payment assistance programs where you can get your down payment paid for or a portion of it. If you want to know how much home you can afford, I have a free home affordability calculator. The link is in the description. Ultimately, I don't think there's a perfect time to buy a home. Just like other big life decisions that you've made in your life, like for instance, when my wife and I decided to have a kid, it's like, is it a good time? You really never know. Is it a good time to get a new job? These are big life decisions, and really, I think sometimes you just have to make the jump. Now, getting into a $400,000, $500,000 commitment, I don't think you just jump into that haphazardly. That's where you determine if you're financially prepared. You think about what the future looks like long term, because I do like to have my clients be able to commit to living in the home for about 10 years, which I know is a huge commitment, and there are big life events that could come up. But the reason why I think that people should live in the home for 10 years right now is because since the housing market is so unpredictable, there's the possibility of a crash or housing prices appreciating. So my thought is, if you live in the home for 10 years, whatever's going to happen in the economy is going to happen. You'll start to gain equity in the home. So hopefully in 10 years, you'll be in a good spot with whatever happened in the housing market and the economy. Hopefully you won't be underwater in your mortgage. You'll have equity in the home, and it will make sense to move at that point. It may never be a good time to buy a home, but by being financially prepared and educating yourself on the housing market so you can make an informed decision could be your key to home ownership. To find out how you can buy a home with no money down, check out this video or this video about the future of home prices. Thanks for watching to the end, especially if you're a subscriber.